October 6th, 1977. Just past 3 in the afternoon. Brainerd Place Office Complex, Lyndhurst, Ohio. A quiet suburb. A dentist's parking lot. Danny Greene walks out of his appointment and moves toward his car. The afternoon is ordinary. A woman across the parking lot happens to glance over. She locks eyes with a man sitting in a nearby vehicle who has been watching the door. The man pulls out. Greene takes another step. Then the car parked directly next to his disappears in a wall of fire. The concussion is heard 2 miles away. The bomb is so powerful it tears the parking lot open. Danny Greene is killed instantly. He is 43 years old. The whole thing takes less than 2 seconds. Danny Greene was not just another Cleveland street thug who threw his weight around and died young. He was something the American Mafia had never encountered and never prepared for. He was Irish in a world that ran Italian. He bombed in a world that shot people. He went on television and called made men yellow maggots by name. He survived car bombs, sniper fire, and at least 3 separate assassination contracts. And for 2 years, he waged a one-man guerrilla war against the most organized criminal structure in the country. Get this, he won most of it, until the day he did not. Here is what keeps coming back to me about this story. In 1976, the most bombed city in the United States was not a war zone overseas. It was Cleveland, Ohio. 37 explosions in Cuyahoga County in a single year, 21 of them inside the city limits. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms ranked it number 1 in the country. They tripled their staff in Northeast Ohio just to investigate the wreckage. Normal people in the Collinwood neighborhood had a routine. When a car blew up outside, they waited until the smoke cleared, then sent their kids back out to play. That was life in Cleveland, 1976. And one man was responsible for 3 out of every 4 of those bombs. But here is what makes this story genuinely insane. Before Danny Greene became the most dangerous non-Italian in the history of American organized crime, he was an orphan from a Catholic parish in Cleveland. His mother died 3 days after he was born. His father, a Fuller Brush salesman, drank himself out of his job and his parental responsibilities and dropped Danny off at Parmadale Catholic Orphanage in Parma, Ohio, 3 miles outside the city. That is where this story starts. Not in a crime family, not in a gang, in a church-run orphanage, where a boy with no last name to protect him decided very early that he would protect himself. This is the story of how Danny Greene went from an altar boy in Collinwood to the most feared man in Cleveland. How he seized a union, built an Irish mob from scratch, killed one of the city's most powerful bosses, and then looked an entire crime family in the eye and told them to come find him. How he turned Cleveland into a war zone and survived assassination attempt after attempt. And how a dentist appointment on an October afternoon finally gave his enemies the one thing they could never get through bullets and bombs, his location at a predictable time. But here is the question this story keeps raising. The mob tapped his phone and learned about that dental appointment. So how did no one on Greene's side ever notice they were being watched that closely? Because there is a detail buried in the investigation that followed his death. A detail about who was feeding information to the other side. And when you hear it, the entire Cleveland story changes. Danny Greene was born November 14th, 1933, in Cleveland, Ohio. His mother, Irene, née Fallon, was gone before the week was out. His father, John Greene, unraveled afterward. Eventually remarried, briefly tried to rebuild a family, but Danny ran away from his stepmother repeatedly until his paternal grandfather, a newspaper printer who worked nights, took him in for good. They lived in Collinwood, a working-class neighborhood on Cleveland's east side, and Danny roamed the streets at night while his grandfather worked. Think about what that childhood looks like from the inside. No mother, a father who came and went, a grandfather doing his best on a printer's wages. Collinwood in the 1940s was a neighborhood where ethnic identity was everything. Irish families lived alongside Italian families, and the friction was constant and physical. Danny Greene attended St. Jerome Catholic School, where he was an altar boy, a strong baseball player, and an all-star on the basketball court. He loved the nuns and priests. He genuinely did. But he transferred to St. Ignatius High School, and the fights started almost immediately. Italian-American students, constant, sometimes brutal fights. And the hatred Danny developed in those hallways stayed with him for the rest of his life. He was expelled from St. Ignatius, transferred to Collinwood High School, expelled again, this time for chronic tardiness. In 1951, at 18 years old, he enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. And here is where things begin to click into place. The Marines noticed two things about Danny Greene almost immediately. He could box, and he could shoot. He became an expert marksman. He made corporal in 1953. And when he came back to Cleveland, he came back as a man who was physically disciplined, militarily trained, and hungry. He was 5'10", curly blonde hair, vain in a way that would only grow more pronounced with age. He jogged every day. He lifted weights. He gave up drinking and smoking. He would eventually get a hair transplant, obsess over tanning, and run a strict diet of fish, vegetables, and vitamins. And while he was building that body and that self-image, he was also building something else entirely. By the early 1960s, Greene was working the Cleveland docks as a longshoreman. And the ILA, the International Longshoremen's Association, was about to get the education of its institutional life. In 1961, the ILA removed its existing local president. Greene stepped in as interim, won the subsequent election. Now here is the thing. What Greene built on those docks was not a legitimate union operation. It was a shakedown dressed in union clothes. He raised dues by 25%. He forced workers to unload grain boats on temporary contracts and hand their paychecks over to him, ostensibly for a building fund. Most of that money went straight into his pocket. He fired more than 50 members, calling them winos and bums publicly. He called work stoppages as often as 25 times a single day, not because of any labor dispute, but to demonstrate his authority to the stevedore companies and shake them down for payments. And when one company owner refused to pay, Danny Greene did not issue a formal complaint. He threatened to murder the man's children. The FBI put the family under armed protection and escorted the kids to school. An investigative reporter named Sam Marshall gathered worker affidavits, published the exposé, and Greene was removed from the union and indicted November 13th, 1964. Federal grand jury, embezzlement, $11,542.38 in stolen union funds. The conviction was later overturned on appeal. Rather than face a second trial, Greene pleaded guilty to the lesser charge of falsifying union records. He was fined $10,000. He paid a fraction of it. He never spent a single day in prison. Stay with me here, because at some point during the union years, something else happened that the history books usually treat as a footnote, but is actually the key to understanding everything that follows. FBI agent Marty McCann approached Danny Greene and recruited him as a confidential informant. Greene accepted. His code name was Mr. Patrick. The Bureau classified him as a top-echelon informant, which means he was considered one of the most valuable sources they had. Danny Greene was simultaneously a union criminal, an enforcer for the Mafia, a street boss building his own crew, and a paid FBI asset. He was working all four tables at once, and for a long time, he was winning at all of them. Out of the union, and officially untouchable by its politics, Greene found ready employment. The Cleveland Solid Waste Trade Guild hired him to keep the peace among the city's rubbish haulers. What that meant in practice was bombing, burning, and pouring acid on the equipment of anyone who refused to cooperate. Impressed by his efficiency, Alex Shandor Burns, a powerful Jewish mob figure in Cleveland, brought Greene on as an enforcer for his numbers operation. And through Burns, Greene connected to the Italian family structure through underboss Little Frank Brancato, who used him as muscle for garbage hauling contracts and labor intimidation across the city. Now this is where it gets interesting. Greene was not a subordinate by temperament. He was using the Italian structure the way the Italian structure was using him, and both sides knew it. While working for Burns, he was building his own crew on the side. He called it the Celtic Club. His enforcers were Keith, the Enforcer Ritson, a former Golden Gloves boxer; Kevin McTaggart, his cousin; Brian O'Donnell, an electrician; Jimmy Icepick Sterling; and a bomb technician named Art Snepperger, to whom Greene paid bonuses specifically if a bombing generated television coverage or newspaper headlines. Let that land for a second. He was incentivizing his bomb maker to make the work newsworthy. Greene also built an identity around his Irish heritage that went beyond pride into something almost theatrical. He drove a green Lincoln. He wore green jackets. He signed every document in green ink. He decorated his apartment in green. He handed out green pens to associates. He flew an Irish tricolor flag from his trailer on Waterloo Road. He read extensively about Celtic and Irish history and genuinely considered himself a modern Celtic warrior. This was not affectation. This was a man constructing a mythology around himself, deliberately, in real time. In 1968, he nearly ended his own mythology by accident. He was supposed to bomb an East Side numbers man who was refusing to pay his protection fees. The dynamite had an unusually short fuse. The bomb exploded inside his own car, threw Greene 20 feet, and permanently damaged the hearing in his right ear. When police came to question him afterward, Greene reportedly said, "What's that you say? The bomb hurt my ears and I can't hear you." That is who we are dealing with. The break with Burns came over $75,000. Greene went to Burns for a loan to open an after-hours drinking and gambling spot. Burns arranged the money through the Gambino crime family in New York. Burns's courier, a man named Billy Cox, used the cash to purchase cocaine instead. Police raided Cox's house. They seized the drugs and what was left of the $75,000. Greene refused to repay a cent, his position being that he had never received the money, that Burns's courier lost it, and that the debt was therefore Burns's problem entirely. Burns disagreed. Burns put out a murder contract worth $25,000 on Danny Greene. Here is what you have to understand about what happened next. Multiple crews took that contract. Multiple attempts were made. One time, Greene pulled into a gas station and discovered a bomb wired to the undercarriage of his car. The device had been improperly assembled and failed to detonate. Greene disassembled it himself, removed the dynamite by hand, and brought the rest of the package to a police officer he trusted. When the officer offered him police protection, Greene turned it down. On March 29, 1975, Holy Saturday, the night before Easter, Shondor Burns walked out of Christie's Lounge at 2516 Detroit Avenue. Within a few blocks of St. Malachi's Church, he opened the door to his car. The bomb inside, packed with C4 military explosive, cut his body in two. Police believed Greene was responsible. Then on May 12, 1975, someone returned the favor. A bomb tore through Greene's building at 15,805 Waterloo Road, Collinwood. The second floor collapsed. Greene survived because a refrigerator had lodged against a wall and shielded him from the falling debris. A second, more powerful device was also planted in the building but failed to detonate. Greene credited the intercession of St. Jude, the patron saint of lost causes, whose medal he wore around his neck every single day. He walked out of that rubble, posed for a newspaper photographer standing in front of the boarded-up windows, and smiled. On May 26, 1976, the man who had kept the peace in Cleveland, organized crime for 32 years, died on the operating table during heart bypass surgery. His name was John Scalish, boss of the Cleveland family since 1944. And here is the critical detail. Scalish had not named a successor. In 32 years of leadership, he had never prepared anyone to replace him. He left behind a vacuum so complete that the underworld collapsed into itself within weeks. The man who reluctantly filled that vacuum was James Licavoli, known as Jack White. He was 71 years old. He did not want the job. He said so openly. But he was the most senior figure with the national connections to hold the structure together, and so he accepted, with the stated intention of staying in power only until a stronger man emerged. What emerged instead was John Nardi. Nardi was 61, the secretary-treasurer of Teamsters Local 4 to 10, a nephew of Cleveland's longtime consigliere, and a man who believed the leadership was his by bloodline and ambition. He allied with Danny Greene, and that alliance is where the war officially started. Nardi wanted Licavoli's position. Greene wanted independence from the Italian structure entirely, plus control of vending machine routes, gambling operations, and a cut of the Teamsters' money. Together, they were not just a power faction, they were a wrecking crew. Within weeks, key Licavoli allies were being eliminated. Leo Lips Mosseri, Licavoli's right hand, a 69-year-old man with a criminal record stretching back before the 1920s, disappeared on August 22nd, 1976. His car was found in the parking lot of an Akron motel. The trunk was soaked with blood. He was never seen again. Eugene the Animal, Ciasulo, Licavoli's most effective enforcer, was seriously injured in a car bomb that summer and quietly relocated to Florida. An innocent man named Frank Persio was killed when he tried to move a neighbor's car out of a shared driveway, not knowing that car had been wired by Greene's people for the neighbor, a Licavoli associate. The ATF tripled its staff in Northeast Ohio. They set up a dedicated task force. By the end of 1976, that task force had documented 37 bombings in Cuyahoga County in a single calendar year, 21 inside Cleveland city limits. 16 in the suburbs. Number 1 in the entire United States. Not just a mob war, a siege. Here is what you cannot understand from the statistics alone. These were not remote crimes happening in warehouses or dark alleys. They were happening in driveways, in parking lots, on residential streets. Families in Collinwood and Lyndhurst and Akron were waking up to explosions. Kids were being kept inside. People were learning to look under their cars before they got in. That was daily life in Cleveland during the Licavoli-Greene War. Licavoli had to do something. He was embarrassed. He had been made to look helpless by an Irishman who had no standing, no made-man status, no family behind him. In mob culture, that humiliation is worse than the body count. So he reached out to Jimmy Fratiano, known as the Weasel, an important figure in the Los Angeles crime family who had grown up in Cleveland and still had relatives there. Fratiano introduced Licavoli to a hoodlum from Erie, Pennsylvania, named Ray Ferrito. Ferrito had killed before. He was experienced, and critically, he was unknown to Greene. The plan was to use Ferrito, with support from Youngstown underboss Ronald Ronnie the Crab, Carabia, and Pasquale Bucci Cisternino, to find and kill both Nardi and Greene. Licavoli offered Ferrito money. He also offered him something that mattered more in that world: full membership in the Mafia. A button. "Made in our thing," was the exact phrase. But Greene and Nardi were not easy targets. Ferrito spent months trying to establish their routines. At one point, Calabresi and Iacobacci followed Greene all the way to Texas, where he was assembling a deal to purchase a cattle feeding operation and processing plant. They could not find him there. In March of 1977, Cisternino and Calabresi learned that Nardi and Greene were traveling to New York together. They wired a bomb to Nardi's car parked at Cleveland Hopkins Airport, rigged it to a standard electronic garage door opener, and rented a room in the airport motel to wait. But the bomb had been connected incorrectly. Nardi and Greene returned from New York, walked through the lot, got in their cars, and drove away. According to Ferrito's later statement to the FBI, Cisternino ran through the motel lobby with the activator in his hand, pushing the button over and over as the cars disappeared into traffic. Now this is where it gets complicated. You can't make this up. The most powerful crime structure in Cleveland had brought in outside help, spent months planning, traveled to airports, and could not successfully detonate a car bomb against the two men they needed dead. Meanwhile, Danny Greene was doing television interviews. After the Waterloo Road bombing, Greene sat bare-chested outside his trailer under an Irish tricolor flag and told reporters on camera, "I have a message for those yellow maggots. That includes the payers and the doers. I walked away from the explosion. I didn't run." He was openly naming the Italian mob on local television in 1977, and no one could touch him. What Licavoli's people finally managed to accomplish, they accomplished through information. In mid-May of 1977, John Nardi inexplicably broke his usual routine and parked in the regular Teamsters lot on Carnegie Avenue instead of the nearby gas station he always used. Greene had sent 2 of his men to warn Nardi that White was planning his murder. Nardi's response was, "Don't worry, Jack White is my friend. I've known him all my life." On the afternoon of May 17th, someone parked a vehicle loaded with the explosive equivalent of 15 sticks of dynamite directly next to Nardi's Cadillac. The bomb was detonated by remote control the moment Nardi stepped outside. He was killed instantly. Greene had lost his only real ally. After Nardi's death, Licavoli extended a fake ceasefire to Greene. It was a play for time to track him, time to identify his patterns. Because the one thing Greene had always understood was that predictability kills, and for years he had been unpredictable enough to survive. But they tapped his phone, and his phone told them exactly where he would be on October 6th, 1977. Greene was smart about it. He borrowed a fellow mob member's car for the appointment, figuring that switching vehicles would make him harder to identify. It was a reasonable precaution. It did not work. Ray Ferrito had spent months learning to recognize Danny Greene personally, not just his car. He spotted him in the parking lot at Brainerd Place, despite the vehicle switch. While Greene was inside seeing his dentist, a second car, packed with explosives and wired for remote detonation, was carefully positioned in the parking spot directly adjacent to his borrowed vehicle. At just past 3 in the afternoon, Danny Greene walked out of the building and moved toward his car. Ronnie Carabia, parked nearby with a remote detonator, waited until Greene was alongside the bomb car. Then he flipped the switch. There was a woman in that parking lot at the moment of the explosion. Her name was Debbie Spoth. She was a sketch artist and the daughter of a Berea police detective. She had locked eyes with Ferrito as he pulled out of the lot moments before the blast. She wrote down his license plate number. Then she sat down and drew his face from memory. That sketch, handed to Cleveland Police Lieutenant Andy Vagno through her father's connections, would crack the entire case. Within weeks of the explosion, Ferrito had confessed his crimes to the FBI. Greene's remains were cremated on October 8, 1977. He was buried at Calvary Cemetery in Cleveland, the same cemetery where his enemies from Scalish's era had also been laid. In the end, they shared the ground. Ray Ferrito pleaded guilty to the murder and received a 5-year sentence. He served 21 months. His statement implicated Jimmy Fratianno in the planning. Fratianno, facing indictment and fearing that the people around him were already flipping, agreed to become a government witness. In 1980, after testifying in trials that produced racketeering convictions against 5 major organized crime figures, Fratianno entered the Federal Witness Protection Program. He was the highest-ranking American Mafia figure to ever turn government witness at that point in history. Ronnie Carabia and Pasquale Cisternino were convicted on state murder charges for the Greene killing. Jack Licavoli himself was arrested and charged. The investigation that began in a Lyndhurst parking lot metastasized upward through the national Mafia structure in ways that no one, not Licavoli, not the New York families, not the FBI's own leadership, had anticipated. Because here is the thing nobody tells you about what came out of that investigation. When federal agents began pulling the threads, they discovered something that shook the Bureau to its foundation. Someone inside the Cleveland FBI office had been leaking classified informant lists, the names of every person secretly cooperating with the government, directly to the mob. Anthony Liberatore, the labor boss connected to the plot against Greene, had obtained those documents through an FBI employee. The leak had exposed active informants to the very organizations they were informing on. It forced the Bureau to completely overhaul its internal security protocols. It was not just a betrayal of procedure. It was a betrayal that may have cost lives. And the legal architecture built on the rubble of the Greene murder went further still. The federal prosecutions of the Cleveland family, powered by Ferrito's testimony and Fratiano's cooperation, laid the procedural and evidentiary groundwork for what became the Mafia Commission trial of 1985, the federal case that simultaneously prosecuted the bosses of 5 New York families using RICO statutes. That trial changed American organized crime permanently. The families never recovered. The National Commission never functioned the same way again. The bomb that killed Danny Greene in a dentist's parking lot in Lyndhurst, Ohio, lit a fuse that ran all the way to the top of the American Mafia. Here is what I keep coming back to with this story. Danny Greene wanted something that was simple on its face and impossible in practice. He wanted to be left alone to run his own world on his own terms. He was not trying to destroy the Italian mob out of ideology. He was trying to carve out space that was his and defend it against people who believed, correctly under their own rules, that no outsider could hold territory without their permission. That collision between his refusal to accept those rules and their absolute need to enforce them is what turned Cleveland into a war zone. Not greed, not insanity, a border dispute between 2 different ideas about who gets to decide. There is a parking lot in Lyndhurst, Ohio that looks like nothing today. A regular suburban commercial lot. Nothing marks what happened there. But if you know this story, if you really know it, you drive past that corner and you see something else. You see a man who read about Celtic warriors as a kid in an orphanage, who wore green every day of his adult life because he needed the world to know who he was, who borrowed someone else's car on the last day of his life because he still believed he could outthink them. And you understand that the most dangerous thing about Danny Greene was never the bombs. It was that he genuinely believed he was indestructible, right up until the moment he was not. If this story got under your skin the way it gets under mine, do me a favor. Hit subscribe. We drop a new mob documentary every week on this channel, and each one goes places the history books do not. Drop your take in the comments right now. Here is the question I want to think about with you. Danny Greene was a simultaneous FBI informant and active mob killer. Did the Bureau protect him longer than they should have because he was too valuable to lose? Or did they cut him loose when the heat got too high? Because those 2 possibilities lead to very different conclusions about how Danny Greene actually died.